Hi there, it's Neil from Diagonal Move. My most recent video, or one of my recent videos, was about a game called Crossing the Line Aachen 1944, kind of an overview, how to play type video. In that video, I was partway through a campaign game. I think I was approaching the end of turn 3. And a week or two later, I'm now approaching the end of turn 4 of 8. So it's a big game. It takes quite a while to play, but it's a really interesting game, a real puzzle of a game. What I thought I would do, because at the risk of having my entire content creation ground to a halt as a result of this game being on my table for weeks at a time, I thought I would just do the occasional update video on how the campaign's going. I'll probably do one around about midway to the end of each turn, so we've got another few turns to go. People who saw the original video may remember that the Germans begin the game more or less lined up down this side of the west wall, these sort of fortifications of Dragon's Teeth down here, and the Americans start in a couple of locations, sort of here, and then down here. And really, the aim of the game is to, for the American player at least, is to take control of certain victory point hexes. In this particular game, the Americans are trying to take Aachen. That'll give them 12 victory points. And there's also victory points available for a few other places dotted around. However, with this particular campaign game, because I drew the Aachen victory plan first, that's the one that's going to take precedence over any others, but meaning that this victory point hex is by far the most valuable in this particular version of the campaign. That obviously, if you were to have drawn a different victory point plan first, that may change. But anyway, what's happened? And here's the really interesting part of this game: is it's such a puzzle, because at a certain point in the game, the German forces will see some of their units withdraw, and this is what happened down the bottom here. At the end of turn 3 in the last video, or near the end of turn 3, the Americans were they basically just kind of almost stopped, particularly up here and to a lesser extent down here. And the Germans were really holding them back, and the Germans will win by minimising the amount of victory points that the Americans can get. But what happened was, and this is to do with historical events the game is simulating, some of the Panzer units down the bottom here, they withdrew, leaving large holes where the American tank units could just drive through. And if I sort of try and zoom in a little bit, we've basically got these great big stacks of units here, really quite powerful mixed units. This one's a sort of a lightly armoured vehicle and armoured engineers, I think that is, but between them they've got a power of 13, a strength of 13, and they're coming up against these infantry units that have a strength of maybe 4 or 2, if you know, and so they've just steamrolled through, and the German forces have collapsed. But nearer the top, where Aachen is, we have the 1st Infantry are still, the red counters there are still struggling to get past this defensive line that's been built. And this defensive line is made up of a mix of units. This is sort of machine gun based units. It's not going to focus, is it? And because the armoured units don't project zone of control into the cities and the towns, it makes it quite difficult to provide that armour support that the infantry would get in the more open terrain. However, we are now, the Germans at least, are now at risk of encircling the German forces, being encircled by the American forces. Something that really stood out is, as the US were really coming through down the bottom here, they've broken the line, so to speak, the HQ units, which are these things here, were displaced. And because they were displaced, they had to be moved to a different part of the map. They lose their activations, and if you haven't seen the other video, loosely speaking, the game is each turn is made up of a number of formation activations, and that number varies from turn to turn, but when you're displaced you lose activation points, and so you become less effective, which makes sense. And so that happened a few times with the German side. The Germans were displaced a handful of their HQ units, so the Germans were displaced down here and displaced here, meaning that very quickly this this line of counters here, this defensive line, they're all part of the same unit, which is this 49th, I think it is. They all very quickly couldn't activate because the HQ unit was displaced so many times, and probably that was a result of my tactical genius, shall we say, or lack of genius for on the German side in trying to defend Aachen there, but very quickly ground to a halt that particular fight back. And what's interesting now is that the Americans are having, or had some reinforcements, and they don't get a huge number of reinforcements during the game, and I'll just see if I can find the reinforcements chart to show you. So at the start of turn 4, the Americans get the 30th Infantry with a few tanks, and they also get the 2nd Armoured, or part of the 2nd Armoured, come in to in support of the 1st Armoured, 1st Infantry and the 3rd Armoured, which are there in the beginning, but they come in from the very, very top of the map, just up here, and the German reinforcements are placed along the northern part of the west wall, and that kind of runs along a stream just here, and so that makes it quite difficult to cross as the Americans, because you've got these pillbox hexes, you've got unfavourable terrain, a few towns and cities dotted about, which for the armoured it makes it quite challenging. However, there's a great big hole just here. Like the dragon's teeth stop, the natural defences aren't so much there, and so of course with my units moving to reinforce Aachen, the Americans were able to just punch a big hole through there as well, and they completely pushed back, isolated a few units, and they're going for some of these smaller victory point hexes as well now. The risk though that the Americans have taken is that they've gone and isolated themselves or put their chain of command at risk, because we have basically a line for the 2nd Armoured and the HQ's here, and we have the others down here, so it's not going to take much for the Germans to start to pull back a little bit and break that chain of command. The only thing is the Germans don't get a huge amount of reinforcements this turn either. I think when I find the correct upper side of the board, so as you can see, some of the better divisions for the Germans withdrew, and they're only really going to get some infantry in support, whereas the Americans are going to get more in support up at the top edge of the map, and it's not until turn 6 that the Germans start getting some decent reinforcements. But the Americans have now kind of in a slightly vulnerable position. So from a German point of view, do we move these units here and try and sort of cut off the American encirclement of Aachen? It's an interesting quandary. So, how far can the Americans push through before they really cannot push through much more? But equally, for the Germans, how can you defend on two different fronts? It's a really interesting question. I have got a few more activations in this particular turn. The 30th Infantry have no more activations left. The 3rd Armoured and the 1st have 5 each, roughly. And the Germans, though, are really struggling with only the 526, which is basically this counter, this counter, and this counter, actually having more than 2 activations. So the turn is coming to an end. I will put this video up online, and if it proves helpful for people to understand how the game works and the various decisions you have to make in the game, a little bit more than just looking at the rules like we did last time, I'll put turns 5 through 8 up online periodically as well. Thanks for watching. I hope my tactical and strategic genius has shone through, although I doubt it. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.